We have got a problem. I want to know who designed this. This dang lid won't open. Today we're going to make a small music box. It has a movement in it, Amazing Grace. I started by drawing it up, modeling it up on SolidWorks Maker, and creating some drawings here. As you can see here, it's essentially just a mitered box with a tongue and groove lid and bottom, and I added a few extra details to really make it pop. I'm going to be using walnut and maple for this project, just for contrasting colors. This walnut is actually local to my area. I bought it off a guy around here. Believe it or not, there are a few trees in Kansas. That might have been the last one. To keep the project simple, I'm making all the parts 5/8 inch thick. So I'm using only 3 tools on this project, power tools: the planer, the router, and the table saw. But if you went with 3/4 inch stock from the store or 1/2 inch, then you'd only need 2. The first detail I'm adding is this inlay edge banding that's going to go on the sides and the top of the sides, and using a 3/8 router bit, and it just wasn't quite big enough, so a pencil line extra, and it fit perfectly. That SolidWorks Maker that I was using, it's actually only $48 a year now, and it does everything that the professional version does that costs thousands a year. So I think that's pretty cool. If you'd like me to do a quick video on drawing up a project with that, leave a comment down below. So now I'm gluing in the banding, wiping off the excess glue. It fits in there real snug, so I don't really need this tape, but I just didn't want it to pop off on the ends. While that's drying, I cut the brass feet and the copper divider. I didn't get the copper on video, but the copper cuts like butter with this carbide blade. The brass catches a little bit, but it does it just fine. Cutting the lid and the bottom to their final size now, and moving over to the router, going to put the rabbet on to turn them into the panel to fit in the grooves, and using these brass setup blocks to get it accurate. Those are pretty handy in my opinion. I use them a lot, you can see in this video. And as you can see there, got it just right. Putting a 45 on the lid here just for an extra little detail. I got some burn marks on here, so just trying to scrape those off and sand that off before we glue it all together. Then I kind of thought an extra little detail on the inside of the lid would be nice. And I had this bee in the computer, so I just cut that out real quick. And I thought I'd just burn that on there. And so we got a B for Dave. And that worked out real good. Sanded it down a little bit so the edges of the burn are real clear and a little bit of the white from the maple shows through. Putting the grooves in the side pieces to accept the top and the bottom, and now cutting them down to their final size. Now we got to get it set up for the miter. I'm using this Klein tool to get it exactly 45 and modifying this sled that I had. I didn't want to make a new one. I was kind of under the gun to get this done. And one thing I did notice is that the miters were a little bit open, so if I could have changed that a quarter of a degree, that would have been better. Before I put the 45 on this piece, I need to route down using this jig I made and a bushing, a little space for the musical movement. This is because the handle that you turn to operate the movement, it's only so long, so it needed to be about a 1/4 inch or 5/16 in order for the movement to operate correctly. I also made a little hole pattern. Took me a couple times to get that right. And now just testing the movement, screwing it in to make sure it's in there right before we move on. I had to waller out this hole just a little bit. Now cutting the 45s, just setting that piece directly on the cut line on that sled, and it gets you exactly where you need to be. Now I'm routing out just a little groove for this divider. The divider is just to protect the movement, so you can put things in one side of the box and you got the movement on the other side of the divider. So now we're just ready to glue it up. I put a little bit of tape on the inside corners just so, I won't be able to get to the inside to wipe that off. So just to keep it from getting too messy on the inside. Now, like I was saying before, the corners were a little bit open. So I'm using the little sand off some wood trick and mixing it with glue to kind of fill in that little gap there. Sanded those off and you can't really even tell. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but I had the little spline detail. So I'm quickly kind of making a little sled to put on my sled here. So I can cut these splines in here, the grooves for the splines. I did use, when I cut the splines, an 1/8 inch flat bottom blade. So this sled will allow us to set the box in there 45 degrees to the table surface, and we'll cut right through it with the blade, and that'll show us exactly where it's going to cut our splines. Pretty simple little deal, didn't take very long, and I wanted to make sure I didn't cut through to the inside, so I just drew it out just to make sure. And as you can see, that's the depth that I'm going to cut through, and so it only cuts through about halfway, and it gets about 3/4 inch on each side. And I marked this out on the box just to make sure. I don't want to mess it up at this point. And cuts right through, just moving the box to each one of those marks. Fitting the splines in, they fit pretty good. I did have to sand down a few of them just to get them to fit right. And now I'm just routing in the little slots for the feet. I ended up rounding off the edges of the brass feet just so they'd fit in the slots that I made with the round router bit. Gluing in the splines now and let them dry and cut the ends off here, as you can see. Giving it a little sand, and looks pretty good so far. Ready to cut the top off. So I set the blade up to where it just doesn't quite make it all the way through, and it's so thin I can just cut it with a razor knife at this point, and it'll just pop right off. Cleaning up this little groove for the divider, I cut just a little bit on one side there so there wouldn't be a groove in the lid. I wanted to make sure of that. Now setting up my marking gauge to mark out for the hinges, and this is where the problem occurred. I ended up using too small of barrel hinges. I should have noticed this on the model or just looking at the hinges, but hey, it gave me a little bit extra practice. So the problem is the material on the back side of the box, on the back side of the hinges, there's too much material back there. There's not enough space. When you open these barrel hinges out fully, the gap between the barrels should be less than the combined material thickness behind the barrels. So I did have to remove those barrels. As you can see, I had to use the vise to get them in, and so they were hard to get out. I did that off camera because I was a little bit frustrated. But one thing also that I learned with these barrel hinges is that it's best to drill them to the exact depth. I did have to do a little bit of persuasion here to get these to the right height, and then on these bigger ones there's a little set screw in there to kind of wedge them out in place. So it did work out, but I did end up, the holes got a little bit messed up going from the small ones, taking the small ones out, but I made a new little jig and drilled bigger holes, and it worked out perfect. To attach the brass feet, I just used a 2-part 5-minute epoxy and set those in there. That worked out pretty well. Now it's time to do a final test fit on the movement just to make sure everything works properly before we put a finish on here. And if you guys have made it this far, be sure to hit that like button and be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And so I'll take that back out, and I'm gonna just give this thing a good shellacking. And I did put multiple coats on there, sanding in between, and it really turned out pretty good. I mean, it's actually a pretty simple box, but if you add these little details, it makes it look pretty sweet. So I'm pretty pleased with the way this turned out. What do you guys think? Leave a comment down below. And now it's time to put the movement back in, and let's test it out. For a video suggested just for you, click the thumbnail on the left. For the latest video, click the thumbnail on the right, and to visit the channel, click the icon in the center.